So, good morning, everybody. Good morning, panelists. Good morning, attendees. My name is Shahida. I'm the Chief Exec of Faith Star. Welcome to this morning's webinar, Voices from the Edge. We're particularly looking this morning at bringing together a panel here today made up of Olivier Tesmo from Sadaka, Barclay Phillips from Pfizer, Sarah Hepworth from Public Health, Sheffield, and Richard Crosby from the Clinical Care Commission, and Dr. Lisa Phillips from who's also a governor on the CCG from Sheffield as well. So welcome, panelists. Thank you for being here this morning. It's great to have you all. I'm just going to do a very quick rundown of the agenda for yourselves and the attendees this morning. The plan of action is we've got 30 minutes of discussions. We've had some pre-questions come in from members of the community before the webinar, and we'll kind of explore those questions a little bit. The aim of the webinar today is, and I apologise everybody, but my screen has just decided to freeze. Sorry. So it's really just looking at a space for dialogue and discussion to explore the issues around vaccine hesitancy, the community's development, programme delivery and implementation of vaccine programmes, and how we can better engage with and bring different sectors from public, big pharma and communities to work in a collaborative manner to look at how we can get more representation from our diverse communities involved in that, and some of the issues and opportunities that surround that. So we have a number of questions that came from community members before, and we'll explore that with the panel. That'll be for about half an hour, and then the second half an hour to all attendees. If you're currently watching right now, if you look on the bottom of your screens, you will have two boxes. So you have a Q&A box and a chat box. So to all the attendees this morning, welcome. It's great to have you here. If you have any questions that you'd like to put to any of the panel members, please just click on the Q&A box and type your question, and our admin, the lovely Lily, will pick those questions up and get those back to the panelists. If you have any thoughts or reflections, they can go in the chat, so please feel free to use those two functions. Our hope is that we will have an hour for the panel discussion this morning, 11 while 12, and then we'll have a break 12 while 1 and for lunch, and then from 1 while 2 we'll have breakout rooms, and our hope is that we'll have a couple of panel members in each of the 3 breakout rooms, and you'll get 15 minutes each. And you can spend 15 minutes each in each of the breakout rooms to spend a bit of sort of one-to-one, bit more intimate time with the panel members rather than a large group discussion, to explore actually a number of different areas. So the first room will be looking at increasing representation in vaccine development and what are the issues and opportunities around that. The second room will be looking at the programme delivery around vaccine, and that's looking at reducing vaccine hesitancy and looking at some of the good work that's already happened in Sheffield around reducing vaccine hesitancy in our communities. And the third room will be looking at getting the vaccine out, so operationally, practically, what has that meant? What does that look like to get the vaccine out into communities? So those are the 3 breakout rooms. As attendees, you'll get an opportunity to have a conversation in all 3 and meet with all the panelists in much smaller groups if you wish, and that would be 1 while 2. Lily will be sending a link out to all attendees and panelist members for during the lunch break for your outbreak room, so you should get a fresh link to link into those outbreaks. So that's a quick run through of the agenda for today. Again, thank you all so much for attending. Thank you, panelist members, for taking the time out today to be part of the discussion and conversations. And I think we'll just get straight into it. So before we do, I'm very conscious that we could just do a quick round of introductions from the panelist members. I know I've introduced you by name, but it'd be great if you could say a few words for the attendees as to who you are and where you're from. That would be fantastic. So I'll start as it is on my screen. Olivier, if you want to just introduce yourself to the attendees.
Yeah, morning all, and thank you, Shahida. My name is Olivier Tesmo, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Sadaka. Sadaka is the Sheffield and District African and Caribbean Community Organized Association. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier. Richard?
Yeah, hi. My name is Richard Crosby. I'm a pharmacist and I work with Sheffield CCG, or Clinical Commissioning Group. And for the last however many months, I've been leading on vaccines in Sheffield for COVID vaccination.
Thank you, Richard. Barclay?
Morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be involved in this panel session. So I'm Barclay Phillips. I'm a doctor by background, and I'm currently the medical director for Pfizer, and have been involved in the vaccine development program.
Thank you, Barclay. Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Hepburn, Improvement Principal working in Public Health Sheffield at Sheffield City Council. And during the pandemic, I've been leading on the public health response with Black, Asian, ethnic minorities in relation to the disproportionate impact, and done lots of work around vaccine hesitancy and funding of these different community organisations.
Thank you, Sarah. Lisa?
I'm Lisa Phillip. I'm a GP in the north of Sheffield at the Chapel Green practice. I'm also a GP on the governing body of Sheffield CCG, and as such, I've done a lot of work on, looking at hesitancy towards uptake of the vaccine, especially in underrepresented communities.
That's it, thank you. So we had a number of questions that came from communities before the webinar. So I'm just going to run through the questions. And then we'll kind of, as panel members, feel free to jump in at any point if you think that you want to add to that point. So one of the first questions that we had was, how can we trust the vaccine development from Big Pharma when we are not represented in the research and development of the vaccine? So this was from a member of the community that was interested to hear about how can we trust vaccine development if we're not represented in the clinical trials, if we're not represented in the people that make up vaccine testing and things. So I'll put that question to Barclay first. Sorry, picking on you straight away. But then obviously Olivier and others, if you want to jump in on that. So sort of thoughts on that, Barclay?
Yeah, thank you, Shahida. So we feel that diversity in clinical trials is absolutely fundamental, and ultimately we feel that whatever we're researching, whichever population are going to be ultimately using medicines or vaccines, those people should be represented in our clinical research to make sure that it's kind of fair and balanced. And so if we think about the vaccine development program, we saw very early on that the vulnerable groups were clearly the older population, but also the Black and Asian ethnic minority population were clearly at high risk for all sorts of different reasons from getting COVID and getting severe COVID. And so when we were setting up our clinical development program, we wanted to make sure, A, that we recruited a significant number of the elderly population, and B, a significant population of an ethnically diverse population. Now, for our particular program, we recruited in 6 different countries. So it was the United States, South Africa, Brazil, Argentina, Germany, and Turkey. And we recruited 44,000 people for the phase 3 trial. And in that trial, 42% of the trial population were from ethnically diverse groups. And so that covered, because of the US cohort, it covered a large Hispanic population, it covered a large African-American population and an Asian population. So altogether it came to 42%. And we also had about 40% of older ages in the trial as well, again to reflect where COVID was most serious. So yes, so we think it's really important. And when we analysed the results, the results were the same in terms of how effective the vaccine was and the safety profile in the Caucasian population and in the ethnic groups as well.
That's great. Thank you, Barclay. Thoughts, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of trust, clearly now we're a long way beyond the clinical trials as well. So we had the clinical trials and we had representation in the clinical trials, but now half the UK population has been vaccinated, with these vaccines, and actually it's all being monitored by the yellow card system. So any adverse events are being monitored by the yellow card system, and nothing's coming out about different different rates of adverse events in different communities. So I think, it's great that there was a representation in the initial trials, but actually now we've got a lot more data about the safety in all populations, particularly the over 50 populations.
Thank you, Richard. One of the other questions that we've had as well is around, what we think the reasons are for vaccine hesitancy within communities. Because for very many communities, I know with the work that Olivier and Lisa you've done, and Sarah that we've done as well, that there's this perception that communities aren't taking up the vaccine, but actually exploring why that is. And I know there are historical trust issues around that, so it'd be really good to kind of explore that a little bit, and I'll put that to Olivier and Lisa, why we think there's some of the vaccine hesitancy.
Yes, thank you, Shaida. Before I answer that question, Shaida, can I just take a minute to go back to your first question? Please?
Yeah, of course, Olivier.
The issue regarding trust. If we knew what we know now, I'm talking mainly about big pharma, I'm sure they will have done things differently, because the issue of trust is now apparent. But before they got engaged into the vaccination, see, we didn't have all the data that we now know in terms of trust, hesitancy, and so on. This is because participation was completely lacking. That means the BAME community didn't participate in large number. 42%, when we know the long history of trust that we got, wasn't good enough. That means if Big Pharma will have probably engaged nearly 80% of the BAME community into the vaccine, into modelizing vaccines, so that now the issue that we got now will have been solved from the first start. Now we're talking about hesitancy. The word hesitant for me is a failure of doing something immediately. It is normal for human beings to be hesitant. That means being hesitant for me should not be looking negatively in our society. It is what human beings do normally. And again, when you look at the history of trust and the history of vaccination, mainly in Africa, the BAME community is completely correct to be hesitant. It's because our history from vaccination has not been a good one. And all the research proved that. And also what Big Pharma have done over the years in Africa hasn't always been great.
And just to continue from what Olivier has just said, there is that history of mistrust and that history of some quite unethical trials that have been carried out, and that's always in the back of people's minds. But I think it's more than just history. I think we kind of have a health service that doesn't seem to cater to the minorities. If we take, for example, something as simple as dermatology, we have no pictures of dermatological conditions in darker skin. Just something as simple as that. It's we need to be more representative. And I think the 42% that Barclay just revealed was higher than I thought it was, actually, Barclay, because I didn't think you'd get that much uptake from sort of Black and ethnic minority groups. But that shows that things are improving because you had volunteers coming in. So I think we still have a lot of work to do and a long way to go, but we need to address all of these little things that kind of disconnect those communities from our health service in general and from research.
I think that's a really good point. Is it how do we close the loop? Because I think for going back to the question of mistrust and kind of historics, is that, today in our communities within living memory, we have families and communities that are still suffering from the outcome of unethical practice in medicine and in research. And so there is that kind of mistrust. But then also there's been vast amounts of work that have been done to overcome some of that. But what we never did was close the loop on sharing that information. So like you, the perfect example, Lisa, you just said, well, actually, I'm really surprised it's 42%. It comes back to, doesn't it, Barclay, this idea of, well, how are we communicating the things that we've improved or the things that we've changed? And I suppose that's a question, again, Barclay, is that what more do we think, or I suppose it's to all the panel members, what more could we be doing? And another really quick example is if, for example, the oxygen thing, where the oxygen monitor, there was a big hoo-ha in the media about go and buy yourself this oxygen monitor, because if your oxygen levels drop, you know, it gives you an indication that you're not well with COVID. But actually, for people with darker skin, the oxygen monitor didn't work. So again, it's this whole concept of how are we supporting people, how are we involving people in clinical research. Sarah, I think you wanted to say something, and then I'll open that question about how we can get more involved.
It was just on the lines of trust again. Obviously, during the pandemic in May and June, it didn't help that the government were not releasing the Kevin Fenton papers. So we saw all the Black Lives Matters movement and people feeling that the government just didn't care what happened to BAME communities. And people were, you know, it was felt by the communities that people were down in their droves and no one was doing anything about it. We'd got the research, it wasn't being published. That really doesn't help people feel confident in able to come forward and trust the government. Since then, we've had 2 reports and they were published in June. But I don't know if you remember, but way back in June of last year, it took 3 weeks and lots of lobbying at a local and national level to get that information published with clear recommendations. We've got 7 really good recommendations now that we can take forward, which obviously Shahida and I are embedding in a huge amount of our work in Olivier as well in Sheffield. But it's that really underpins, if we can't trust the government, we can't trust Big Pharma, you know, and we don't see ourselves represented in services that are for us, then that combination is quite difficult.
Thank you, Sarah. And just coming back to that question, so how can we encourage more involvement from communities? What are the kind of things that we think we should be doing? And I'll open that up to Lisa and then Olivia, and then if anybody else wants to chip in. Lisa, floor is yours.
I think feedback from communities is key, because you don't always recognise a problem until someone tells you about it. So just going out and asking about the issues people are facing would be a great start. Just looking at things, because I think we do things and we've always done them that way, so we don't necessarily see the problems with them. And I know that people are always willing to talk. I think COVID has given us one thing, that people are more than willing to bring their, you know, voice their opinions and their, you know, their issues and their problems and make suggestions. And I think we're better now at listening. So I think we just need to take that to the next level, hear about the issues, and then just try and work with communities to try and address them. But we'd be willing to do that on a regular basis.
Thank you, Lisa. Olivier?
Yeah, I share totally what Lisa just mentioned. That means increasing vaccine intake has to do with a complex problem of solving inequality. All research shows it. I mean, if you minimize the inequality gap, then you increase the trust gap as well. That means you minimize the trust gap as well. That means by minimizing the inequality in our society, it goes in pair with also minimizing the trust gap. That means what the government needs to do is continue what we're doing at community level, is continue to put more money into this BAME community, so that we can as well increase our chance of having a good health. That means participating in the government and increasing our trust with the work that the government is doing. But one thing that I want to come back to, Shahida, the idea that the BAME community is hesitant with vaccination is a wrong way, because if you go back to the history of vaccination itself, vaccination comes from the BAME community. The word vaccination is, although it's a Greek word, but in Africa nearly 600 years ago, people were vaccinated. If you look at the history of the smallpox, you're going to see that all those history originate from Africa. Then this is a community that have invented vaccination, that knows exactly what vaccination means. Then they are not worried about vaccination. They are not worried. What they want is to participate, so that they know exactly what is innate that they're putting into the body. Because remember, to vaccinate is to put something that will, is to put something into your body for your body to react. But you can't insert something in your body if you don't know exactly what's going into your body. Then for me, it's a matter of time. We need to be patient with community. Being hesitant is actually a good thing. It's about taking a journey to learn what is coming into your body before you can take it. It took me nearly 4 months to take the vaccination. I mean, I took my COVID vaccine just last Sunday. But ask yourself, why have I taken 4 months to take the vaccination? That's because I wanted to observe. I wanted to learn more. And there's so many people like me who are on that journey of taking their time before they take the vaccination. Then it's something that as a community, we will all end up doing, but we need to be patient.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Barclay, yeah, go for it.
I'd like to come back on the really important topic around trust and mistrust, and thinking back to Olivier's comments earlier. Trust has to be earned, doesn't it? It can be very quickly lost, but it can take a long time to earn that trust. And I think it's incredibly important from the pharmaceutical industry perspective that we actually, come to meetings like this and we talk about the process and what research is all about and how rigorous it is. And absolutely things could have been done better in years gone by, but I think it's really important that people understand and we talk and learn from each other about the rigorous framework that is around clinical research now. So every clinical study has to be approved by our regulatory authority in every country where it happens. So it's not just enough, if there's a study in America, that doesn't give approval for the whole world. Every single country, including the United Kingdom, has to look at the study and say, yes, we think this is the right study to happen in the UK. And then the second level of approval is the ethics, which is incredibly important. So we have a really robust ethical group in the UK that look at every single study, and they look at, is this a scientifically valid study to do? Is it being conducted in the safest possible way? Are patients properly informed? So the ethics groups read all our informed consent documents and they say, yes, this is giving people who are going into the study transparency in terms of what the study is looking at and what the benefits might be and what the side effects might be. Is there proper informed consent? So is everybody going into the study knowing exactly what the study is going to involve, and so on and so forth. There are so many controls and safeguards in research nowadays, but I think mistrust often comes from the fact that people aren't talking to each other, and if they don't understand and they don't hear the information, you fill the void with misinformation. And so that's why when Shahida asked me to come along today, I was so delighted to participate, because this is part of the journey that I think that we need to go on to start to rebuild that trust and to kind of share in the education around how research works, really.
Yeah, thank you, Barclay. Richard, did you want to come back on anything?
No, I don't think I do on that one, thanks.
Sarah?
Yeah, okay.
I suppose one of the questions as well that we've had is sort of what's worked well in Sheffield in terms of the vaccine rollout and things. And I know that there's been a phenomenal amount of work that's gone into that, and there's still a bit of a way to go. It'd be great to kind of hear, Olivier, your thoughts on the vaccine rollout, particularly because I think just today the BBC reported that within African Caribbean communities there's still a very low uptake of the vaccine, and yet they're probably also twice as likely to get COVID and severe COVID as well. So that's the stats from today. And so to me, there's still an issue there that we're still, for whatever reason, not getting out into the communities that probably need this vaccine the most. So any thoughts on that, Olivier?
Yes. I think I developed that in my previous answers. It's a matter of time. I'm very confident that obviously the African and Caribbean community will take the vaccine. For me, it's a matter of time. For many of them, they're not stupid. They want to observe. They want data, and they want core data to see exactly. They also want a bit more information regarding the vaccine, something that's not still coming or is available, but probably the language is not simplified for them to understand exactly what is it. That means from the definition of the vaccine, what is it? Many of our community don't know what means a vaccine. Why do I get vaccinated and so on? Then I think public health needs to do a bit more work in terms of this to simplify the communication. And in Sheffield, we have done exactly that. That means we have done it. And if you look in Sheffield over the past 4 months, there has been an increase in the number of Black communities taking the vaccine. Then in Sheffield, we're doing an absolutely brilliant work. But my community, the BAME community, I am sure with time, the intake will be increased.
Lisa, what do you think GPs could do more to support that? I mean, I know they're doing a tremendous amount anyway, but it's this notion of the worry that you have that there's members of our community not taking the vaccine for whatever reason, and the impact that could have on them.
I think by giving out the information, as Olivier suggested, we can help. We have quite a few calls where people just want to ask a few questions because they're not quite sure, or they have a medical condition that hasn't been mentioned in the media, so they're not sure if the vaccine is for them. So continually doing that, I think will help. Having forums like this will help the public to be able to engage and just ask questions and just giving out the correct information. I think the sad thing is that people want to make informed decisions, but there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's so damaging. And, you know, it's not just a case of just putting people off something. The vaccine is saving lives. So you can cost people their lives with this stuff that they're finding on social media and everywhere else. But, you know, we just need to push the point that if you're going to look for information, look at the reputable sources. Look at SADACA's website. They liaise with, you know, the CCGs and the NHS. Look at the government website. Those are the ones that we can trust. They need valid information to make their decisions.
Thank you, Lisa. Richard, any thoughts on that? Oh, sorry, Libby.
Yes, no, I just wanted to say, that means to add to what Lisa just said. I think she said it all. Our community trusts us more. They trust us. Then it is important for public health and all the big pharma to work very closely with community on the ground. This will be massively important. They need to come to us so that we establish that close working relationship. And also, I think public health, just like our government, we need to be patient in solving this complex issue. Patience is very, very important. If you look at the history of vaccination, it has always been minimum 10 to 20 years. But COVID vaccine only started 6 months ago. I think we're asking probably too much and too quick from our population. We need to learn to be patient. People are taking the time. They will end up getting the vaccine, but we need to be patient with them.
Thank you, Olivier. Richard? And then Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of vaccine uptake in general, we've got 15 networks in the city, 15 GP networks, and every single one of them is offering the vaccine to patients. And I think that's really important. And that, you know, I think the local knowledge, you know, of the GPs working with the communities, I think is really important. I'm struggling slightly with the patients thing, and I'm sitting on my hands and trying to be good. And I do put it back to like NHS England when we get challenged about you know, uptake in certain networks. You know, around it's slower than other networks, and I push that back to NHS England. But I guess where I struggle slightly is you know, we hear about a level of distrust with the pharmaceutical industry and with the vaccines, but you know, 130,000 people in this country have died of COVID, and patience is great, and I on one level I really get it, and it's going to take a long time, I think, or you know, a period of time for people to catch up and get that confidence. But actually, the reason I struggle with the patients is because in the meantime, COVID's killing people. Yeah. I struggle with that.
Yeah,
I think,
absolutely. Sarah?
Just to add to what Richard said, also, the longer that COVID's circulating, the more increased chance of variants, and that is a position that we don't want to be in. So it just... I totally agree, Olivia. I understand that people want more information. I think there's a job of work around social norms for us here. We've got 260,000 people which are currently vaccinated. Yeah. So as we are doing through the Bain Public Health, we're getting more and more information out there that nearly half of the Sheffield population are vaccinated with their first dose. Is absolutely, that's mega. And there are issues then in terms of saying, you know, the majority of people, although we have got a reduced number in Bain communities have taken up the vaccine, still the majority of people that have been offered it are taking it up. I think that's another important phrase. So using those social norms, and also, as you've said as well, getting that information in a more simplified fashion. We have got lots of different ways of doing that. We can also think about how we can be more creative in taking the vaccination programme out into communities. So we've been talking about different events that we're running, such as the taxi driver COVID secure event that we had last week, whether or not we could do it at those kind of things. Also thinking about parks, for example. So where we've got high footfall, your building would be amazing. And I know lots of there, but it would be really, really brilliant to be actually taking it to the doorstep, as we have done with mosques and pop-up clinics. So I think there's lots of things we can still do, even though we're doing a lot already.
Yeah, thank you. I think that brings a really interesting question up around community engagement. I mean, there are trusted, as Olivier was saying earlier, about trusted spaces and places within communities such as Sadaka and various other, community organisations across the city that have done some phenomenal work. But the thing is, we're not really utilising those trusted spaces and places where communities recognise them and communities trust the people that are leading those organisations. So I suppose there's a question around here of how do we bring, Big Pharma, NHS, CCG, community organisations, how do we bring those together to work in a more collaborative way? Because that hasn't happened for a long time. And moving forward, we can't kind of go back to pre-COVID days. So I suppose my question is where do you see sort of collaboration and community engagement kind of going in the future? Richard?
Just having worked on this programme and worked on a lot of others in the past, I've never seen such collaboration as I have on this programme. It's been absolutely fantastic. Certainly across Sheffield, we've all worked together, the teaching hospital, the council. I meet with the council every week, constantly talking to the networks across the city, events like this, working with communication department, who work with the council communication department, funding local communities to make their own messages, having healthcare leaders from different populations produce messages in the population's language. If only everything we could work like we've worked with COVID, we'd get so much more done. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's set a model.
That's correct. Yeah. I totally agree with Richard. I think Sheffield have led by example, and it's great to see. It's a shame that what we're doing now, we haven't done it over the past 20, 30 years. If we have done so, I'm sure we won't be here sitting here talking about trust. The community will be, that means everything will be close together, and all this vaccination campaign will be very, very fluid. It's because we missed the point. We didn't have good leadership in the past. The leadership that we're showing now is what we need to do every single day and in the future as well to minimize all this.
Thank you, Olivia. Barclay, any thoughts on how Big Pharma can get more involved in community engagement and community organisations?
So, I mean, I totally agree that collaboration and working together is fundamental. And I also agree that COVID has been an exemplar of how that works really well. And the trick now will be to take that beyond COVID, because as we all know, so many other diseases have suffered during this past year. The number of people with delayed cancer diagnoses, the number of people who are delaying going to hospital with heart attacks and strokes, and there's so many other conditions that have suffered throughout this pandemic in addition to COVID itself. And I think from the pharmaceutical industry perspective, it's really critical that we work in partnership with all our colleagues, not just at a national level, but also at a regional and a local level as well, so we can really help to move the needle on all the diseases out there in addition to COVID.
Thank you. Lisa, thoughts?
I agree completely with what everyone said. And I think that just looking at my practice, which is currently serving as a vaccination site, we have members from the council managing the car park, and they're there all day. And it's just that collaboration that just makes everything go smoothly. So we do need to learn from this and continue this model because it works.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, Shaida, can I just come back to what Barclay just said, please?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I totally agree with him, and I would like Pfizer to lead by example, taking into account the long history of work between Pfizer and Africa. That means it is massively important for Pfizer to come in our community, respective African and Caribbean community, and then explain the history of vaccination and even apologize to some of the work that has been done in Africa, because all this is still hurting a large number of our communities. I mean, and it is important for Pfizer to come back, work with us, and then explain why is it different compared to the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just very conscious of the time. To the attendees listening, if you have any questions that you'd like to put to the panel or any thoughts, if you want to indicate, and we'll give you the floor to ask any questions that you have. Or we could have had a very cheap round and nobody wants to ask us any questions, which is great.
I think there is one question.
I think there was one in the chat. Yeah, Amna had asked, just made a comment about the impact of public figures creating confusion. So certainly with the issue with AstraZeneca, so the President of France and Angela Merkel, their sort of doubts over the AstraZeneca for the over 60s and the impact that has. Any sort of thoughts on that, panel?
Politics playing into vaccination, I'm afraid it's really sad, isn't it? It's awful to see, because as Lisa alluded to earlier, it costs lives, and it again puts further information out there that people have to digest and then understand that in the context of myths that are circulating. And yeah, accurate information, and actually the media have a responsibility to not report information unless it is absolutely evidence-based. And sorry, this really drives me a bit bonkers, but it's just so bad practice because it costs lives.
Yeah.
Well, we have to remember is that these are two sort of cohorts that have decided not to do this, but worldwide we're vaccinating people, that we're following up the participants in the trials, and this hasn't been recognised by them. If there was an issue, a real issue, those trial participants and the data that they're gathering from that would have influenced the way we go with the vaccine. So they obviously think that this is fine, and they haven't seen it in the millions or hundreds of thousands of people that they've dealt with. So it's very irresponsible to publish something based on very low numbers.
Yeah, and the impact that then has. We've got a question from Navlet. Does having the vaccine quite closely after having COVID mean that you're more likely to have more adverse effects? And whoever wants to take that question.
I don't think having it closely after having COVID, it would make a difference, because I think your immune system's already been triggered. I think as long as you're well enough at the time to go and have the vaccine, I think that should be fine. I think even if you've had COVID sort of months before, it sort of triggers a slightly different response, because your immune system has been a bit more active. So as long as you're well now, it should be fine to go and have the vaccine.
Excellent. And any other questions from attendees?
Yeah, Shaida, can I just come to the previous question, please?
Yeah, of course, Olivia, yeah.
The question asked by, is it Adam or one of them?
Amna, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I think it's also, I recognize the question, and for me, it's the failure from our government also to, give us the benefit, that means the economical benefit, and also the politic of vaccine, because so far what the public is lacking in terms of information is what is in there for the government. For the government, it's not just about our safety, although our safety is the #1 priority, but there is also an economic benefit that they're not telling us. There is also the politic. If you look at China is vaccinating its population only with its own vaccine. Russia is doing the same. And China is in Africa now, vaccinating so many countries in Africa with the Chinese vaccine, which is not probably recognized in our country. All these messages are lacking, and we need to prepare the British public with the politic of vaccination.
Yeah, thank you, Olivier. We've got another question from Amna. How can we deal with long COVID? Lisa, I know you've been doing some work around long COVID. Do you want to take that?
I think there's a lot more recognition now of long COVID. I myself have long COVID. So the 25th of this month was my 1-year anniversary of the day that I became ill. There are lots of clinics at the moment. So in Sheffield, we have clinics, and they're opening up around the country to sort of support people with long COVID, because it can be quite debilitating and quite isolating, because it's just it's weird and wonderful. It's like nothing I've ever experienced in my life. So just having that recognition and that validity and the support in the clinics is absolutely essential, and just the education going to GPs as well. I know that there's new guidance out there that sort of helps to recognise it earlier and to intervene earlier. So I think by continuing all of those things, we support the people developing long COVID.
Thank you. Well, that's an interesting question. What is sort of Big Pharma doing around the whole issue of long COVID? I know you just mentioned earlier about other conditions that have kind of fallen to the wayside due to COVID, but you know, Big Pharma are always developing new techniques and researches around different types of conditions. Has there been any work started or thoughts on long COVID?
So it's very early days, isn't it, in our understanding of long COVID, but we're working in close collaboration with many academic units around the world to understand it better. So a lot of the studies that are ongoing at the moment are about gaining that understanding. And, from what we can see, it affects multiple body systems, doesn't it? It can affect the cardiovascular system, the neurological system, the joints. All sorts of things can be affected, and so we're learning, and who knows, in time there may be some development programs for things that might be able to help in the future, but I think at the moment we're just all in that learning phase to try and understand this condition better.
I think one of the things that we do need to think about with long COVID is the process for getting a referral into the clinics could be quite long because of the ruling out other factors that it could be in that early process. So it's perhaps having a package of information for people that, if we haven't already, Lisa, we may have, and I'm not aware of it, but something to support them at home straight away. So they've got that in the bag and in different community languages. I know we met Maggie Quinn came to our community group, and we were talking about actually the representation in terms of the staffing of the group, again, in terms of people thinking that service will be for them or is for them. So I think there's a lot still, and this is across all of different services, I understand, but just in terms of a new service being set up, it felt like an opportunity, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of long COVID, understanding its impact on people with different economic backgrounds. For some people, it's, maybe being able to go to work might be an option, or working from home. But actually for some of our communities who are working on the front line, that might not be such an easy option. And we do know of people within communities that, have suffered with COVID and long COVID, and continuing to kind of push their health to the brink because they may not have the economic means to take rest and have some space to recover. So I think there's a really important question there about recovery from COVID and how we support communities in the recovery phase, not just sort of physically and mentally and health wise. I think quite often we lose sight of the economic impact. I think you mentioned earlier, Olivier, about actually having the vaccine, talking about the economic and social benefits of having the vaccine. But also I think a question for the panel is, working together collaboratively, how can we support communities within the recovery phase as well? So I'll kind of open that out to people. Thoughts on the recovery phase of COVID?
Richard? Just going backwards, of course, the first thing is to maximise uptake of vaccine as possible, because it's so much better to avoid this. I was thinking I got COVID about the same day as Lisa somehow, sure, very separately. And although I'm not saying I've got long COVID, I'm still out of breath when I walk upstairs, and it's changed me as a person. So, I can't emphasize enough the importance of actually getting the vaccine out to everyone in the first place, and then really sort of listening to what people have said. It's really brought it back to me how important it is to involve communities when we're designing these services in the first place. Just make the services better and more accessible. Yeah,
absolutely. Sarah, did you want to come in?
I've lost what I was going to say. I was too busy listening to Richard. Sorry, I'll come back.
Recovery phase.
Recovery. So I think, when Richard said vaccination, I think recovery for me, I was thinking about the roadmap. Recovery feels a long way off still. I think that we're still talking about vaccination. We need to make sure, as we've just said, that we get as many people vaccinated as possible. But it's really important also to get the messages out. And I know people are fatigued with hearing it, but hands, face, space is going to be here for some time. And those key messages have to be continued with. In terms of recovery, I think the reason it blows our minds is it's going to be so huge, because it actually is. If we think about inequalities, it's tackling inequalities. It's using the health and wellbeing strategy that we've got. It's looking at the lens through COVID and the impact on the city, and it's looking at every aspect of that. So there's no quick answer on it, because recovery is every aspect of the wider determinants, from health, the economy, to housing, and we've got to look at that and address it. And also we've got to treat people holistically, because we might want to look at those in individual strands, but people don't come, they don't need 20 different appointments for us to deal with them. So I think there's a big piece of work about how we take forward that programme in the same collaboration as we've done during this last year, so that we can really, and I think I'm so excited about the opportunities we've got in Sheffield now to really reduce health inequalities. Having worked in public health for 20 years, and we have made inroads, but there's still a lot more to do. And I think that's the really exciting thing for us.
Thank you, Sarah. Barclay and then Olivier.
Yeah, I think a really important message for me, not just at the national level again, but also regional, local level, is how important science and health has been this year. I mean, really, if it wasn't for scientific research, we would still be struggling trying to think of, what is the route out of this pandemic. But science has really come, science has been the hero, hasn't it? Together with the health service looking after people who get COVID, who've been phenomenal. The other amazing thing this year has been the power of science to find a way out of this, both through vaccination, but also treatments as well. If you think about dexamethasone, made a big difference in the recovery trial. Many people are looking at antiviral treatments as, potential therapeutics of the future. So I think the conversation with the British public around the importance of science and the importance of health for all of us, and then also how that has a direct link into the economy and the wealth of the nation, I think that's become so front of mind this year. We mustn't lose that. We need to carry on that conversation as we go forward.
And I think the reverse of that for the NHS and for science is actually the importance of engagement with communities. I think actually it's that reciprocal triangle, isn't it, that is really important.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Olivier?
Yeah, I share what Sarah just mentioned. For me, it's extremely important. And when I look back at the government, I think actions speak louder than words. What I mean by that is 3 months or 4 months ago, the government spoke about a risk assessment for BAME community. And so far, I'm not hearing all this on the news anymore. That means I want to see what risk assessment has been done, has been carried out to all our BAME key worker. This is massively important to bring the trust in our community, to actually realize that the government is trying to solve an issue for us. This is not happening. And treatment as well when it comes to vaccination. My concern, even if I've taken the COVID jab, but this is my concern. We're trying to solve a very complex issue. We're trying to solve. Vaccination is a very complex issue. But what we're doing as solution, we are only presenting one solution, the vaccination. We understand vaccination is the quickest and probably most effective way to solve the issue. But also we need to show trust, to show honesty by saying to people that there may be any other avenue to solve this issue. And listen, example, to the African pharmacopy, because there's so many news from Africa where indigenous population are saying we can solve the issue, but we're not actually listening to them. We're shutting them up completely and presenting only one way of solving the issue. I think we need to collaborate and try to search all avenues in solving the COVID issue.
Thank you, Lisa. Any thoughts?
I'm sorry, I was just distracted by a question in the chat.
Yeah. I'll answer. I'll just read out. I felt quite let down. Even though my GP has been contacted when I became very ill, there was no follow-up. Knew it would be huge pressure on them, but they should be able to find a way to do this. Yeah, so the question for you, I suppose, Lisa, on that one. Sorry, you've kind of become the be-all of all GPs.
No, I think it's very easy to feel forgotten by your GP. I was admitted twice, and my GP referred me to be admitted, and I had a really, really unique situation where my GP refused to give me a sick note even. So I understand feeling very let down by your GP. But I think at the moment, we're kind of fighting fires. We're in this emergency system where we're just trying to get through and do as much as we can. But it would be a good idea to follow people up when they have been quite unwell and people have been quite scared. And you know, it is a frightening experience having COVID. So just to have something in the system where we just check on you. We have this for vulnerable patients. If they've been admitted, we check on them after discharge just to make sure everything's okay, that they have everything in place. So having a system like that for someone who's been quite unwell in hospital with COVID would be, you know, it would mean a lot to that person. It may just be a quick phone call from the GP suggest, because we do this with people who are admitted for asthma, so we could have the
I think that's a really, sorry Sarah, come on.
I was just going to say, having had COVID myself in January of this year and been quite poorly for 3 weeks, I was very nearly admitted to hospital. Even with all the knowledge that I had, a year's worth of knowledge and working in this day in, day out, I still felt incredibly vulnerable. And, you know, so I think it's important to recognise that, you know, particularly for people where they might not have as much of that information or skills around this, it must be even more terrifying to be facing. So I just think, yeah, as much as we could do, it's really helpful.
Thank you, Sarah. I think thank you, Navlet, for that question. It's a really important question around patient care and how we respond to patients, not just in terms of COVID, but across conditions. And I think particularly for our BAME communities that have often quite felt marginalised or ignored or disconnected from the system. I can imagine that when the system kind of goes into emergency mode, as it has with COVID, that becomes even more profound, that sense of kind of isolation and disconnect and feeling ignored. And I think for me, there is a question there as how do we as a city and as a medical profession, including Big Pharma, how do we respond to patient care? How do we embed that into our response, not just for COVID, but around a whole range of different conditions as well? So I think, yeah, that's a really important point. Thank you for that, Navlet. I'm not going to get into a debate about patient care because we have 4 minutes left on this webinar and I could talk about that all day. But I would just like to thank all of our attendees. Thank you to all our panel members. The webinar will be available on YouTube, so if anybody wants to kind of catch up or share it, you can certainly do that. To all our attendees, Lily, you will be receiving an email from Lily who will give you the link for the breakout rooms. See, I've got outbreak in my head. This is what happens when you do COVID for a year and nothing else but COVID. You can't have a conversation without saying it. So Lily will be sending a link out for the breakout rooms. Just to give you a quick rundown of the breakout rooms, Olivier and Barclay will be in room 1. Myself and Richard will be in room 3, and Lisa and Sarah will be in room 2. All of you as attendees will get 15 minutes each, and then we'll kind of come back for a plenary. The breakout rooms are starting at 1 o'clock. So if Lily will send out the link, she'll bring us all together, and then she'll send us to the breakout rooms as she's organised them. A huge thank you to all of our panel members today. Thank you so much for such a kind of varied and really interesting discussion. I'm sure this is a start of very many more discussions to be had. Barclay, thank you for your candidness and honesty from Big Pharma. Lisa, thank you for sharing your experiences and your knowledge from a GP perspective, and Olivier, your passion from the community, and Richard, thank you, sir, for being here. And Sarah, I will see you at the other side, mate.